Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet First Class Alexandra Premack, and I welcome you to the 28th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium. It is my privilege to welcome you and our guest speaker, Dr. Jannell MacAulay. Dr. MacAulay is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, class of 1998, and holds a PhD in philosophy with an emphasis on strategic health and human performance from Air University, and a master's degree in kinesiology from Pennsylvania State University. She is also a certified wellness educator, yoga instructor, and holds a certificate in plant-based nutrition. Dr. MacAulay served 28 years in the United States Air Force as a pilot, commander, special operations consultant, international diplomat, and professional instructor. She currently serves as a leadership and human performance consultant within government and corporate sectors. Drawing on more than 3,000 hours of flying experience in the C-21, C-130, and KC-10, as well as decades spent leading teams and implementing complex organizational change, she teaches people how to optimize the human weapon system. Dr. MacAulay was the first leader to introduce mindfulness as a proactive performance strategy for the U.S. military. She also developed and co-founded Warrior's Edge, a high-performance mindset training program with Seattle Seahawks coach Pete Carroll and high-performance sports psychologist Dr. Michael Gervais. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to present to you Dr. Jannell MacAulay.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Alexandra. I'm so excited to be here with everybody today to share about Warrior's Edge, a high-performance pathway to getting command of your mind and elevating your performance. Now, today's session promises to be a session of self-reflection, and I know that's the theme of this year's conference, really taking the time to step back and think about how these topics can affect us, not only in our daily lives, but ultimately our future performance, and especially as we navigate the stressors of military life. Now, with respect to this conference in particular, I want to ask you a deep question to start with. Are you fully prepared for the challenges that are in front of you? Now, I ask that as this year's conference is focused on this idea of warrior ethos. And really what that means is how we embody the warrior spirit. And that's defined as this tough-mindedness, this tireless motivation, unceasing and vigilance, and this idea that we're willing to sacrifice our lives for our country, and ultimately in the pursuit of being the best air, space, and cyberspace force. So are you prepared for that calling? Now, here's the thing. Most people today are pretty good at what they do. In fact, our competitors and our enemies are pretty good at their mission objectives and their mission sets. But what makes the difference today is how we command our mind. Can we do difficult things when the pressure is on? Can we show up in a world-class way when it really and truly counts? Now, some of you may be cadets at the Air Force Academy, really in the thick of doing some difficult things, and I can speak from experience. Many of you may be in the service in the midst of that challenging environment that is hostile, that can be unpredictable, that is unknown, right? Each and every day we are stepping into an unknown. And I would even argue that those of us that are just trying to juggle our professional space with our home life, whether that's working from home and schooling from home and dealing with the uncertainty and what 2021 really has to offer us, we are all trying to accelerate our professional success, I think, without having to sacrifice our health and relationships along that pathway. But it can be excruciatingly difficult for many of us. And that's why this idea of not leaving things on the table, of getting command of our mind, can be so powerful to how we perform in all aspects of our life. Now, what I've learned is that we can train three things as human beings. We can train our craft, we can train our body, and we can train our mind. Now, I want to ask, in the course of your career up to this point, what have you focused most on? Many of us focus extensively on training our craft and training our body. That really is the military way, and they are so valuable and important. We need to make sure that we're technical experts in whatever our job-specific skill sets are. We also completely understand that our bodies need to be in shape to meet the demands of what we're asked to do on a day-to-day basis. But I would argue many of us do not have a formal way of training our minds, a formal way of capturing an ability to be fully present and engaged, to make rational instead of emotional decisions, especially in moments of high pressure and stress. And as I said, every single day we're stepping into an unknown. Things are challenging. Even General Brown, I listened to his remarks yesterday, and he described that is what the Air Force life is about. It's about doing difficult things. It's about challenging ourselves, because within those challenges, we find growth, we find learning, even amidst our failures, right? Failing and succeeding was one of his pieces of advice, as well as challenging the status quo. So going back to self-reflection on some of these topics we're going to discuss today, how can you challenge the status quo in the environment around you to really think about how we perform as individuals in a new and a different way? Now, I've studied in the course of my research people who push the boundaries on human potential, people who do things that many of us would think that they're just out of reach for what we can do as human beings. But here's the thing. This is what I've learned. These individuals are no different than you or me, except one exception. They actually invest in training their minds, right? To be able to do extraordinary things, to challenge ourselves, to grow, to find those spaces where we accomplish great things. We have to be in the present moment, and we have to train our minds to get there. These individuals, and I'm talking elite athletes, elite military operators, CEOs, world-class leaders, these individuals know that they need to train their craft in a world-class way, train their body to meet the demands in any moment that they find themselves in, and then also train their mind so that they can think both clearly and creatively in high stress and rugged environments. And that's really our job description. These athletes and individuals who have found that this is critical to their success, they have games on the line, reputations on the line, things that are very important to them. But I would argue what we do and the expectation of our job in the military is to be so fully prepared that we can execute high performance in these high stress and rugged environments when lives are on the line. We need to be contemplative. We need to be disciplined in how we've trained our minds to find our way there. Now, most of these athletes that you see on the screen here today are these people that have done extraordinary things in their lives. They all have a story where they really found how valuable mental skills training could be for them. And in fact, I have a story too. And some of you might kind of see yourself in some of the information I'm going to share with you about my story today. So I started at the Air Force Academy, and at the Academy, I learned some amazing things. I learned about drive, grit, determination, right, perseverance. And I built those skill sets with my teammates, my classmates at the Academy, and we all went out to the greater Air Force where those things were super valuable, even time management skills that I learned. And it served me well. I really tried to be on this path of success for myself in my Air Force career, flying airplanes, traveling the world, eventually getting married and being a military spouse myself, as my husband was also active duty, having kids, being a leader, doing amazing and great things. And for all intents and purposes, if someone would have saw me about 10 to 13 years into my career, they would have said, man, she's got everything going on. She's so successful. But I will tell you that even in the moments of my greatest success, I could not see the joy. In fact, I found myself in a space where I was so busy trying to be perfect at everything that I did, I lost sight of the fact that there's growth and learning in our imperfections. I also lost sight of the laughter and the love and the things that were around me that gave me joy. In fact, I lived my life stressful moment to stressful moment. And inside my head, I would tell myself a story that sounded something like, well, as soon as I'm done with this career milestone or getting this degree, I will finally start taking care of myself. Or as soon as I'm done with this command position or this particular task or project at work, I will finally start paying attention to my family. And as each milestone, I met them, what happened is there was just another milestone behind it that would then make me make another deal with myself, a story inside my head about how I just had to keep going and getting through each stressful moment. And in fact, I found myself only living my life stressful moment to stressful moment and missing all the spaces between. The moments in between where there was joy, the moments in between where there was an opportunity to truly extend myself and really test where I could go with my performance as an individual. Now, I hit this burnout point, and when that came, I knew I needed a better solution. So that's when I went back to school, got my PhD, and really truly studied how we can, as military members, thrive in these stressful environments that we find ourselves in. But not just thrive, find our space of high performance and doing it in a very sustainable way, really capturing this idea of getting command of our mind and building what I would call that warrior's edge. And so in pursuit of this, I wanted to ask, or the question I was asking was, how do you really create the most effective human weapon system to execute this military mission? And that's when I find you had to train those three things, and how the mind was an aspect of training that I had never been introduced to and was something so vitally important. I needed to start integrating it. So I partnered with some of the best in this space, to include Dr. Michael Gervais, who's an elite and high performance sports psychologist who works with athletes and individuals who push those boundaries on human potential. And then also Pete Carroll, who had been leading from his time at USC through his time with the Seahawks in the space of integrating mental skill sets, which was kind of instilled to this day a little bit of a strange concept for many of us to understand. So our goal together is to take some of these skill sets and equip not just these athletes where games are on the line, but high stress occupations where lives are on the line. And it's vitally important for us to command our mind to elevate our performance. Now, how do we do that? There are actually 16 principles of mindset, 16 things that we can train to be our best, to get command of our mind, to find ourselves building that warrior's edge mindset. And all these principles fit together in a very formalized and organized way. Just as we would spend precise amounts of time and focus on how we train our body, we need to start doing the same with how we train our mind, almost like going to the mind gym on a daily basis. Now, I get that some of this seems strange, but I want to tell you that everything we're talking about has been through two lenses, that of scientific research and also of evidence-based practices of having been tested in alpha competitive environments. So these things come from the research, from the evidence of those high-performing individuals. Now, I get it. Some of you still might be skeptical about these methods and this idea of training our minds. Well, here's the thing. If I were to ask you, and I'm going to give you this analogy because I think it shapes the conversation. If I were to ask you, or if you 60 years ago, right, this idea of physical exercise, and if you were to tell someone, hey, I'm going to go for a run, they would have said, why, is someone chasing you? Would have seemed like a really odd idea to actually go out and run for physical exercise, right? I love this Anchorman meme. It was just not something that people did. But when scientists started to look into the concept of physical exercise, and they found that it can actually increase our flexibility, our agility, our strength, our endurance, our body mass, get our brains firing better, and a whole bunch of benefits for our physical health, then everybody started doing it. Now, this is the cover of People magazine from 1977, right? Jogging, it became the new craze. And there was a cultural evolution in how we thought about performance. And now we knew not only do we need to train our expertise in our craft, but we also need to train our bodies if we want to be the best that we possibly can be. But here's the interesting fact about physical exercise. There was actually a flight surgeon by the name of Dr. Ken Cooper, who today is known as the father of aerobics. And back in the 60s, we had a problem. The Air Force leadership turned to Dr. Cooper to solve this problem. And the problem is that our astronauts were not physically fit enough to get into space, and our fighter pilots were not fit enough to pull G's in our new jet aircraft. So they turned to Dr. Cooper and said, how can we solve this problem? And that's where he came up with this idea of physical exercise, of aerobic activity. Up until then, there was a myth that you only had a certain number of heartbeats. And once you used up all your heartbeats, then you were going to die. Your heart would stop, and that was game over. He actually turned that research, right, and that myth around with all of his research, and determined that actually it's good for us to exercise our hearts. It's good for us to increase our heart rate. And so that's where aerobics was born. And he found that to answer the question of operational necessity to get our astronauts and our fighter pilots to where they needed to be to get the competitive advantage and do what they needed to do in support of securing our national objectives. So I think we're at the precipice of a new evolution in how we think about performance and training with our highly distracted world. And now we as a military have the opportunity to lead by formalizing and integrating training our mind into the way that we operate as human beings, in the way that we train ourselves to be warfighters. Now, why is this important? Well, we want to capture this warrior's edge mindset so that we can build what's called psychological flexibility. Now, what that means is we actually have this ancient brain that wanders around this modern world. And when stress is applied, if we haven't built up psychological skill sets, we will default to survival mode. And that's when we tend to make emotional overreactions to what's going on in our life, what's going on right in front of us, instead of rational decision-making, clarity of thought. And so when we build that psychological flexibility, we will increase our cognitive capacity to be able to manage the stressors as they come at us. We will build mental strength to actually be exposed to psychological and emotional trauma and be okay by bouncing forward from it. And then also improving that mental resiliency. So important. But what's most important in all of this is that those skill sets will then increase our ability to sustain our high performance for the long term. I know I spent much of my Air Force career burnt out. I know I looked around at my peers and the people around me and the people that I led, and most of us are, because we can only hustle, right, and stay with drive and grit and perseverance for so long. It happens at different times for different people. But if we don't start training our minds, we are losing the opportunity to truly see how far we can go. And yes, I get that I'm asking you to slow down to then speed up your professional success and your performance, but that is what the science is telling us. That is what the research is leading us to believe, especially if we want to find our best in these high stress spaces. Now, to really understand what we're training, when I say train your mind, is really it's about our system of attention. Now, our attention system is it's important for almost everything we do in life, from communicating to making decisions to how we interact with others and how we connect. And you can think of it like a flashlight, right? It can be laser focused at whatever is most prominent in our conscious experience, what's going on right in front of us. But it can also be laser focused internally at our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. And you can see if our flashlight gets stuck internally, where we're not really on what I would call the play button of our mind, we can get caught up in the storytelling. We can get caught up in our thoughts. And that's not usually the best place for us to execute positive behaviors when we're faced with stress and rapid, disciplined decision-making. So how do we train our attention system? And the first thing we need to understand, it's very vulnerable to this thing called stress. So when we have stress applied, it is difficult for us to manage those split-second decisions with that contemplative mind. So here's the thing about stress, though, that I want you to make sure that this is very clear. Stress is actually a perceived emotion. Now, a lot of times people will say, oh, Dr. MacAulay is going to come in and she's going to take the stress out of my life. Unfortunately, I cannot do that, because the stress that you experience is your perception of how you're interacting with the world around you. That's why you can be in a stressful situation and two different people can experience it in two different ways. And what we've learned from the research is that you can train yourself to see your stress differently. You can train yourself to really open up the perspective and aperture of how you interact with the environment around you. You know, there's something that many people don't understand, that there's actually good stress and bad stress. So this is the Yerkes-Dodson law I'm going to show you that really illustrates this point. You can see it's a performance on one side of the graph and activation on the other. Now, when we get activated, that's when we get the butterflies in our stomach and our heart starts racing and maybe we get sweaty palms. In those moments, what is really happening is that's called eustress. EU stress. And that's the stress to get your edge. That's the good stuff, the stuff we want in high pressure moments. Then there's a point where we get too activated and we get onto the other side of the curve. That is called distress. Now you can see how our performance is degraded because now we have too much activation. But here's what happens in a normal course of the day, because we are a chronically stressed population. You will experience some form of eustress. Maybe it's before an athletic event you have. Maybe it's before a GR you have to take. Maybe it's before a presentation you have to get. Now, when those sensations start, what is the narrative that goes on inside your head? The majority of people will think in those moments, oh my gosh, I'm nervous. I'm too nervous to do this. This moment is too big for me. But instead, what if we change the way we thought about those moments and we said to ourselves, this means that what I'm about to do is important to me. It means that it matters, and my body is telling me that I'm able to rise to the challenge. Just by flipping that dialogue, changing the narrative in your mind, and learning how to train that on a regular basis can help keep us on the eustress side of the curve, especially when we're faced with those intense moments of pressure and consequence when we need to be high performing. Now, on this curve, there is this dotted line that is known as the razor's edge in elite athletic circles. I call it the warrior's edge. This is the space we want to find ourselves. If you've heard or researched anything about flow state, where we have this optimal brain chemistry, where we can stay focused and present and high performing, because high performance happens when we're on the play button of our mind and in the moment. That's that dotted line. That's the warrior's edge. That's where we have that warrior's edge mindset so we can be our high performing selves, right? Execute our full potential. So that's what we need to seek out. That's what we need to find. And we're not going to even get close to it unless we formalize the way we train our minds and prepare for those moments. Now, one thing that is a concept that makes it difficult at times for us to manage awareness around that stress curve is this concept called mind wandering. Now, the latest research will tell us that we mind wander almost half of our waking moments. So now I've been talking to you guys for about 20 minutes and you have not been paying attention to almost 10 minutes of what I've been saying. Now, I realize that that's how our minds work because they're fantastic at mental time travel. But just think of that at face value. Half your waking moments, you're not paying attention. We've all read a page in a book, right? You get to the bottom and then you think to yourself, I don't even remember what I just read. And maybe you even have to go back 5 pages before you realize that's where I stopped paying attention. This is a very real phenomena. Maybe we even drive our car someplace. You get to the destination and think, I don't even remember what roads I took to get here. That is because your mind has an unintentional off-task thought during an ongoing task or activity. You are trying to read the book. You're trying to focus on where you're driving to, but your mind will be distracted. Now, again, that happens for the average person almost half of their waking moments. I would argue with military members and people who are under extreme amounts of chronic stress, especially, that number is even higher. And then the sad thing about this concept is that the research also tells us that when we mind wander, we think of unpleasant thoughts. We think of our stressors. We don't think about things that are going to be helpful for us in those moments. So just at face value, think about how much time is wasted with your mind being distracted, especially toward unpleasant and unhappy thoughts. So getting control of this concept is vitally important for all of us to execute our high performance. So what is the solution? What you saw on my chart of the 16 principles of mindset, I would say the number one thing you need to focus on is how do you train your mind to live on that play button? And what we found in the cutting edge research is mindfulness is the skill set and the training concept that will help you get control of your mind so you can live on that play button more often, so you can be high performing, so you can decrease all of that mind wandering, all of that time that's wasted. If it takes you 2 hours to study for a test, actually it only takes 1 hour. The other hour, you're mind wandering and distracted about various things. So this skill set, which I equate to mental push-ups, can be extremely valuable for us to be able to get the starting foundation for training our minds. Now, in this space of mindfulness research, there has been everything across the spectrum from it can heal people's psoriasis to improve their relationships, to improving their sleep quality, decreasing emotional eating, improving our physical fitness, can do a whole host of things. And I really think it goes back to, as I mentioned before, we have this ancient brain that wants to make emotional decisions and overreactions to the stressors in our lives. What mindfulness gives us is it gives us back control over our decision making and our behaviors in intense moments. So So when we practice mindfulness, when we exercise our attention system with mental push-ups to stay more on that play button, we are enhancing our ability to increase our awareness and to be more contemplative in how we make decisions, especially when we're faced in high pressure or stressful situations. So I ask, what might mindfulness be able to do for you in your life? How can it affect your levels of performance and where you're going as an individual, and how prepared you will be for the challenges that are ahead? Now, with respect to the research, there's also evidence-based practices of individuals who have been using mindfulness to great effect. And what we found is that elite athletes like this team here, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the All Blacks professional rugby team, they actually have the highest winning percentage of any professional sports team, and we're one of the first to integrate various forms of mental skills training. They do a haka routine before they even start their competition, and yes, that intimidates the other team, but it also gets every single member on their team focused, ready, and on the play button of their mind so that they can execute high performance no matter what's going to come at them as they step into the unknown of that game field. We've also seen from the Chicago Cubs to the Seattle Seahawks to various athletes that I showed on one of my first slides, from Kerry Walsh Jennings, Tom Brady, even Aaron Rodgers recently described in his MVP speech how important training our minds are for their ability to not only be successful, but in Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers' case, to sustain it, right? Even Serena Williams has mentioned her sustainability and her performance has come from investing in just as much of the restoration and recovery space and the mental space as it is in the high performing craft and honing of that, her ability to be a tennis player. So there's a lot of evidence-based practices and teams out there that are also finding great results. Now, I would be remiss if I let you off and out of this session without practicing a mindful minute. So we're going to do this together because I want to introduce you to this concept of how do you even do a mental push-up. And I have found mindful minutes to be the most effective way to integrate this, because it can be rather difficult for us to commit to sitting for 15 or 20 minutes in the morning and actually meditating. But if I tell you you can do these micro bursts of minutes throughout your day, which for me creates more mindful awareness throughout my day. In fact, instead of just doing it all in one sitting, these things can be great for transitions when you come home, when you go to work, when you're about to engage with your family, when you're about to take a test, right? It can be a way to really do a cognitive preparation for whatever challenge is right in front of you. So for the mindful minute, I ask that you just kind of get into a comfortable position, maybe kind of like take a nice deep inhale and exhale and relax through your shoulders. I want you to kind of lift your head and neck a little bit, and I want you to find a particular sensation of your breath to anchor on during this entire minute. Maybe it's the way the air goes in and out of your nostrils, or the rise or fall of your belly or chest. I want you to focus on it intently in those moments. And then as we take our mindful minute, when you're focusing on your breath, your mind will wander. Even in a minute, it's short, but you will still wander. And when that happens, your attention system, right, is going to get distracted by that thought. I want you to have awareness that you're being distracted, release the thought, and then come right back to your breath, right? So we acknowledge that the thought's there, but it's not going to have any control over us in this moment, because we're going to come right back to our breath. And every time we get distracted and refocus, we are doing a mental push-up, right? That is the way we're strengthening our attention system to live more on the play button. All right, ready to try? All right, you can leave your eyes open or closed, whatever is most comfortable for you. If you choose to leave your eyes open, I ask that you kind of channel your attention down the bridge of your nose and maybe to a point in front of you to limit visual distractions. All right, one more deep inhale, exhale, and begin.